Thank you, Mikhail, for these questions, and of course I'll try to give some, maybe scratching a bit surface, answers to these questions based on the presentations. First of all, of course, if we look on the drug regulation and the regulatory systems worldwide, the regulators are usually part of the government. So this means that some of the more overarching topics are clearly affecting the regulators. You could say that as they are part of the governments, you could say if there are in the country no good governance practices and the government doesn't follow any good governance practices, which also includes bad words, which are your good governance is better and more nice to say than corruption, or many other things which are under the good governance, what we understand today, then you could say it's probably a bit difficult to have a better soup in one corner of the pot, yeah? Because the regulator is one corner of the pot. And if the whole pot is a bit vague and fragile and doesn't function, then how you can make a better soup in one corner of the pot? And that's a bit a challenge, and I think I'm extremely happy that Anna-Lia was putting some enlightening on this, that you actually have some ways of looking in a positive way, saying that I think sometimes also on the government level and on the national level, people don't understand what drug regulation is. They see more it like a typical administrative governmental office, and they don't see that you have in drug regulation actually administration management than probably in any other governmental office. But there are very few governmental offices who have this scientific part, scientific assessment of products for the quality, safety, and efficacy. And this is also why the regulators face enormous difficulties of maintaining the good quality people, because if the governmental overall structure is giving the salary level that is not motivating to the highly qualified technical people, they will leave, even if they will be trained, and this is WHO has shown, and again there was a reference, you can train people, but when they get trained, they go to the industry. So you have to have there some sort of a trying to understand how, although part of the government, you can create a conducive environment for the sustainable regulatory authority to function. And these examples that Anna-Lia was bringing, they are good examples from the region, but there are also from other regions, that countries who have gone with this type of a different approach, enabling the regulatory systems to have some sort of a different ways of management than the whole government, they are more sustainable and they achieve more. And I think this is encouraging, and I think we should learn from these experiences. There is also another thing that probably if we look on the regulatory systems and the governance, it's again, there is probably with the regulatory systems, and historically it was probably, now it's a bit changing, there's more emphasis on the protection. Because if you see the what is in wide terms, you know, the mandate for the regulators, and it's to promote and protect public health. This protecting function is more understandable. But I think sometimes we miss that there is also a large component to promote public health. And this promoting public health is sometimes not captured very well. We know the countries where we all know that people can't benefit from innovation if you don't do clinical trials. Now, in some countries, to put up a clinical trial is an ordeal and a nightmare. You wait ages to get permissions from the regulator, you'd wait ages to get permission from the ethics committee. So but this is just one example of promoting public health, not protecting. There are some other things that should be in concrete country settings. What could the regulator do the best to promote in the local situation the public health? And there are some local factors, and also the activities in the local setting that clearly would give added value. There are some probably which are not giving added value, but there are others which will give added value. And it was mentioned pharmacovigilance. Nobody will do pharmacovigilance because you have specific populations. In Americas, there are indigenous populations who have pharmacogenetic things that are very different from other populations. So you have to do pharmacovigilance there locally. Now, I think this is something probably a bit to think about, this good governance and how good governance principles could be in a way that would create a conducive environment for the regulators implement it. Then coming to the other two questions, because I think there were actually two questions, and one was what has changed during the last 5 years? Is there any substantive changes? I think the regulatory scenery is increasingly changing quite rapidly, and sometimes we don't realize actually how rapid the changes are. And of course, they are in some parts of the world probably more rapid and a bit slower other parts of the world. But it's also that what I would say probably during the last 5 years, what has been increasing is involvement of regulators in all types of harmonization and cooperation agreements and work arrangements. There are more regulators than ever working in the regional harmonization projects or cooperation projects, sub-regionally, regionally, and also globally. It's also during the last 5 years, actually, what has happened is that the formerly closed environment, which was the ICH was perceived as a closed club, has in a way quite changed the gears and opened it totally up. You can see now from many different parts of the world, regulators who have started to be part of the ICH, which formerly was not really there, So it's a dramatic change and it's also what, of course, is for me a very positive is that I think during the last 5 years, it's also the more examples of regulators not only sitting together and doing harmonized guidelines, but trying to have arrangements to do work together, to have the arrangements for the work sharing, working together, benefiting from each other's work. And I think this is something that is really very much looking to the future, because probably the future is much more, I would say that the time of individual regulators is probably a bit over. The time of the future and the tomorrow is more of the regulatory functional networks and increased collaboration. So then I think the last part of your question was the issue related, what are the major issues that the agencies, low and middle income agencies are tackling, and what are the problems and things like that. I think in many cases, we don't realize also, but I think the problems, in spite of all our efforts, are still in some of the low and middle income countries really terrific. And they are really partly the same, because it's how to have a conducive environment on the country level for regulators. I have been in some countries quite recently where it's again the same, that the government doesn't understand that the regulatory business is slightly different. You need to have qualified people, you need to have them there and to retain them if you get them. And they say, oh, everybody should be equal. And also the same, but again, Annalia was making, financing model, how you finance the regulators. If the financing is, again, very much a strict way of doing the business and doesn't take the peculiarities of the regulators in account, you just can't have functional regulatory authority because there is no staff. Then it's again the same that in some countries we said about, and the previous speaker said about the training and, not parachuting individual workshops. In spite of all that and core competencies, it's fantastic. But in many countries, there is severe lack of competencies to assess certain types of products. One of the product group is biosimilars. Some countries are really nowadays battling to understand what it is and what it is not, and also some of the assessments are terrifically bad, I must say. So there is severe lack in certain pockets of competencies. They are more technical than generic competencies. And it's also what is lacking is, in spite of all our efforts, is, I would say, there are some, we would need probably many more regulators who are good generalists. You could say you have regulators like physicians, neurosurgeon, long qualification needed. But then you have a family doctor who is taking the first line, you know, and can have a very broad knowledge. And we would need many more good generalist regulators. Why? Because they could know how to rely on others, what you can trust, where you can find the information, because you learn it, but you can't learn it easily because there is a lot of information nowadays in public domain. But many people don't know that they are available, this information. There are also some reliance that you could do if you know which agencies put which type of information in public domain, what's the level of credibility. So this type of how the small, because we forget also when talking about regulators one thing. The majority of regulators in the world are small fish. Anna-Lia was partly talking about that as well. They are small fish, really. If you look at those who are the big fish, it's a clear minority. And what we are usually doing well is to deal with the big fish, medium fish, but we have been completely failing dealing with the small fish. And I think this is something that we need to see, that we don't leave the small fish behind, and we have probably some more innovative ways of how we can help the small regulators, because they can't copy and build up, you know, the big fish model. It just is not applicable for them. So there is probably in the near future more emphasis needed how to take this small and middle size and especially small size regulators to the next stage of development and satisfying their very specific needs, because their needs are often much more different than those for the medium size or small size regulators. I think I have talked enough, so I'll stop here.
Thanks, Lembit.